Alright, so I'm back and we're right where we left off. The my button code, when you click it, says my function was used. And when I refresh the page, we get a title alert. Now the alerts are sort of our feedback. I have title, introduction to JavaScript by concatenating this string value with the string value in the variable title. I've used the string literal to set up what the title is. Now we've kind of moved on to the next part. This part is actually going from the bare bones introduction to a little bit more of a focus on variables and data and naming conventions. So that's actually what I'm going to put here: variables, data, naming conventions. Oops, conventions. All right, so I'm going to get rid of this comment. No, I'm not going to. I'm just going to kind of fix it up here. And we're going to leave that there. Oop. I'm going to leave that there. This variable keeps track of the current tutorial title. And this function is a temporary tutorial function. Alright, so we want to talk about variables, data types, and naming conventions. First, let's talk about naming conventions because it's really the quickest and simplest thing to do, and it doesn't actually affect our HTML page. You may have noticed that I start all my variable and function names with a lowercase letter, but for some reason I've got a capital letter right in the middle of my function. Why is that? Well, that's called camel case. I'm going to go camel case. Camel case. You're noticing a pattern. What happens is the first letter of a variable or function name should be a lowercase letter. When you have more than one word in a variable name, use uppercase for only the first letter of each word, as long as it's not the first word. Excuse my typing mistakes. I am trying to do this as quickly as possible, and that kind of happens. And of course, they don't like my spelling. I have to use dashes. Okay. So camel case, that's what it is. I think I'm going to leave this in the file as sort of a reference for later. You're quite welcome to look up what camel case is, and there's other ways of naming. I've seen people use underscores in between. I've seen people use title case where every word, including the first, starts with an uppercase letter. I've seen all caps. There's lots of different ways to name, but this is the current industry standard for JavaScript variable naming, and it's probably here to stay. I really highly recommend that this is the way that you name your variables so that when you share your code with other people, it's easy to read for them. I choose names that are descriptive. That's another naming convention. They're truly descriptive of what I want in them. I know this is a title of something. Perhaps it's not quite as descriptive as being exact because I still want to keep it somewhat compact, but I'm willing to put in long variable names to make it more understandable, because the more understandable your code is, the easier it is to work with later. You notice that I added a comment though where I declared it, which kind of gave it a little bit more information about what I'm getting out of it. All right. Then there is the my function with brackets. I called it lowercase m, capital F, two different words separated that way. Title case would have been capital M as well. That's just not the way things go here. You'll notice that in JavaScript, even their functions start with a lowercase letter, and as we go on and you see more of JavaScript's built-in functions, you'll see that they use camel case as well. And I'm going to correct that spelling mistake. Okay. So we're past sort of that naming convention. Oh, all variables can use uppercase, lowercase, and numeric characters. So you can have uppercase, lowercase, numeric, and underscores. Those are all legal. So uppercase is A to Z, and lowercase is lowercase A to Z. Numeric is 0 to 9, and underscores are just underscores. So you can use those characters in variable and function names, but no other characters are valid. So these are valid characters for variable and function names. And I'm going to highlight those and press tab just to shift them all over at the same time. Okay, so let's move on past that we are now moving on. Oh, variables. Variables are described as mutable. What that means is that throughout the code, variables can be changed at any given time if the program allows it to. Now, I mean, it's not like it'll change all on its own. It still has to be told. But let's say in my function, I changed the title to, let's change it to just variables. I'm going to highlight and copy paste that. So it doesn't now include introduction to JavaScript. It now is just the part without it. And it's going to be, let's just say, we call it JavaScript Pros, because we are going to be JavaScript Pros now. And in fact, this alert my function was used was just sort of some test information for us. So why don't we redisplay the title after we change it, right? Let's give it a shot. Here, let's refresh. It says now the title is Introduction to JavaScript, Variables, Data, Naming Conventions. And I'm going to go OK. Then when I click my button, it changes it, and now it says JavaScript Pros, Variables, Data, and Naming Conventions. Ignore the checkbox that's actually built into the browser and has nothing to do with our code. This checkbox right here, this checkbox right here, that's built into the browser to try to keep spam pop-ups from stopping people's pages from working properly. And I used to love that thing for being around, but now it's not even necessary. Okay, so the next thing, mutable. So I showed that mutable, their value can be changed. They are mutable, meaning you'd be told to be quiet, this is what you are now. Not only can you change the data that's in it, but you can also change the data type. So I can turn the title into a number. That is a JavaScript thing. It's not common to many programming languages. It's because of loose typing. Most programming languages have strict typing, but they will be declared differently, and we can kind of worry about that as it comes along. When you get to C#, you're going to learn about strict typing and how it's necessary for your code. So I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm going to say could change to a different data type if we wanted to. Example, and there, it's saved. Actually, don't worry about grammar. Grammar is just a little thing, right? Can't help it. Okay. So we've got naming conventions. All right, let's move on to types of data. I think because I've kind of overloaded this with a whole bunch of comments, I'm going to take the liberty of creating yet another JavaScript file, and hopefully it'll create it over here, and it does, good. And I am now going to copy and paste just my first comment over to here. My first comment is just a sort of a reminder of what I need to be doing, and in fact it is now January 25th because it is now past midnight. So I'm going to save this as intro2.js and make sure it's a JavaScript file and save. And I'm going to go here and close that. So it's we've got to keep the title part. Yeah, I'll keep the title part. And save that and close intro. And then I'm going to go to my script tag and I'm going to change it to intro2.js to match that and save it. And when I run it, we should only have the title going. So I'm going to refresh, and we got the title again, but when I click the button, nothing else is going on. Okay, so naming conventions are done. We're about to move on to types of data. I probably kind of put a split in the video a little bit earlier on here. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Let's just move straight on to types of data. There are four, I guess, larger encompassing types of data with a couple of things that you might think of subtypes. The first type is string, and you saw that already. So I'm going to go var string data is equal to, and you see when I put quotes around it, it's text data. All right, then we have var number, and that's equal to 1. You notice that I did not put quotes around it. If I put quotes around it, the JavaScript compiler would have seen it as only text, just like text data over there. So if I did that, it is not number data anymore. It is now text data. Now, I like to use some keywords from time to time. You have to be careful not to use words that might be seen by JavaScript as being the same thing. Anyway, that's beside the point. So let's get back to number 1 here. I've given it number data. It could be 1, it could be 12. Those are integer data by default. Integers are whole numbers, they don't have fractions. But we could also assign it a floating point number. So I'm going to call this integer data. And then I'm going to show you a floating point. Float data equals, instead of putting 12, we'll put 1.2. Anything with a decimal point is considered floating point data to the JavaScript engine. Anything without could be an integer or it could be a floating point depending on how you use it and whether you've parsed it out from a string using parse int or parse float, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Integer data is something that you want to use for math. If you put it into a string, you might not be able to use it correctly for math, especially when you're using the addition operator, because as you can see above, the addition operator when used on strings or when used on text concatenates it or glues it together. And if you tried to glue together string integer data, I'm going to put var string number data equals, and let's call this one 12. So it's exactly the same thing, only now it's got quotes around it. When I put string data and string number data together, concatenated data 1, if I go text data plus 12 using the quotes, or even without the quotes for that matter, I'll tell you something about that later, then it would show up as text data 12. So I'm going to show you that again, but only this time. I'm going to go concatenated data 2. I'm going to copy and paste that, and then copy and paste that. Those are equivalent statements. So this is exactly the same as that in terms of final value, because this contains 12, string 12, and this contains the string text data. So you can kind of see how they relate. As time goes on, you might respond to some user input by changing what's in that data, and you'll want to put a variable there because you can't predict exactly what that data is going to be. You don't want to type it in manually. So integer data, floating point data, Boolean data. Boolean data. Now what is Boolean? Boolean is a simple true or false value. So it can be true or false. And what's neat is that you can use keywords for that. True. Or you can put false. And in this case, I think we're going to leave it at false because later on I think we're going to do something nifty with it. The fourth variable type is an array. Array data. And for now I'm just going to give it a new constructor, new array. And we're going to revisit arrays later, so you can skip past that. Just realize that arrays is a type of data, and we will talk about them later. The same thing goes for var object data equals new object. And that's another thing entirely. There are also different ways to declare each of these, and there's a whole lot more complicated mess in that. It's not quite as cut and dry as numbers and Boolean and string data are. So I'm going to leave those until later on and focus on the somewhat simpler stuff. Okay, so let's go back to this concatenated data stuff right after we kind of summarize. All right, so we have string data, we have numeric data, and numeric data is broken down into integers and floating point numbers. Let's call it floating point numbers, which are fractional and have numbers or digits after the decimal point. That's probably a bit of a simplification, but it helps drive the point home. Then you have Boolean data. In some places you might just call it a bool. So if somebody says bool, you'll know they're talking about Boolean data. Same thing here for int with integer and float with floating point. So int, float, bool. String is just string. There is a short form, but it's very, very rare that you'll see that. So I'm not going to bring that up too much. Okay. Then you have arrays and objects, which we will talk about later. Okay, so concatenation is sort of the next thing on the list. Concatenation is what happens. It's the string operation that happens. You cannot minus a string from itself. You cannot multiply a string by something. You cannot divide a string by something, but you can sure as heck add two strings together. So let's kind of bring down this string concatenation information here, down to the very, very bottom. What is concatenation? The word concatenation implies, I'm not sure if this is the dictionary definition, but means gluing two strings together by appending the second string to the first. What does that mean? As you see over here, we've concatenated text data plus more text data and ended up with text data 12. Have you noticed that I did not put a space between text data and 12? Well, there are no spaces inside the quotes where they're glued together. If you want a space, you have to press space and then you'll get that. Same thing over here. If you want a space, you have to concatenate or glue in another space. Notice there's a space right there. Then you can get the space between string data and number data. String data, number data, which are text data and 12, the exact same values as over here, except that I didn't put the space over here. Instead, I just glued it in between the other ones. Okay, so concatenation means gluing together strings. Simple as that. Where that becomes a problem is when you're trying to add together two numbers. So I'm going to take the integer data and float data up here, and I'm going to add them together down here. So var integer data, actually, sorry, var added data equals integer data plus float data. Now, what do we expect that to be? We expect that to be 12 plus 1.2. So when we alert added, let's call it by its variable name, data is equal to added data. So what I've done here is I have taken the string added data equals for display purposes when we show ourselves a message box with the alert function. For display purposes, I've taken the text and I've concatenated on this number here, the value that comes from adding together integer and float data. There's something interesting about that, but first let me show you what the test is. So I'm going to save it. You see it's red, so I'm saving it. Now it's blue. I'm going to refresh. You'll see title comes up. I click OK. Now we get added data equals 13.2. So it did all this stuff, but notice that I didn't have it kind of give us any feedback again until we got right down to the end here where the alert is. So we've only got two real feedbacks. Everything else is all variable declarations and kind of messing around with the numbers for display purposes. But you see, we expected to get 12 plus 1.2 is 13.2. Makes sense, right? What happens if we change added data equals, and instead of making it integer data, let's add together string number data, which is also 12, but it's in string format, plus float data, which is still 1.2, and it's a number. When we put together a string and a number, what happens? Let's alert again. So added data take 2 equals plus added data. You'll also notice that all I did was change the value of added data by assigning the new result to the data. That's where that mutable stuff comes in. I can change it at any time in any order. So I save that. Now I'm adding string number data. It's not technically number data. It's considered text. So does JavaScript convert it into a number and then add it to added date? Or sorry, to float data? Let's find out. So we have title. Click OK. First added data comes up, just as we expected. And the answer is still 13.2, no change. Oops. And then we click OK. Added data take 2 is, whoa, 121.2. How did that happen? Well, what actually happened was, because it is a string, it automatically, the plus operator automatically assumes that anything being using the plus operator on a string and anything else, all of them are supposed to be strings. So what it's done is it's converted float data to a string. What that means is it becomes 12 plus 1.2, which when you're appending using concatenation with the string is actually 1, 2, 1.2, and that's how you got 121.2 over here. So what happens if you have text and you know you want to do math on it? How do you fix that? Well, here comes the fun part. I'm going to change all the way down here. I'm going to change string number data into new number data. Let's call it new number data. New number data equals. And I'm going to use a special function that's built in to JavaScript. It is a global function, and I'm going to call it, it's called Parse Int. And I put the quotes, or sorry, the brackets. And what you do is inside there, just like you did for alert, you have to pass it, here's what I want you to use to do the job that I want you to do. And that's where I was talking to you earlier on about having the brackets in the function name. What we want to do is we want to parse, which means to find and extract, or in the way that we're using it, it comes down to converting a string or text data into numeric data. So we're parsing, or we're converting string data into integer data, thus the int for int, or integer. And we're going to parse out string number data. So what's going in? 12 is going in, and 12 numeric data is coming out. So new number data is equal to the number that happens when you convert that string into a number. Now, when I take that and I say added data equals new number data, which as you know is based on string number data, and add it to float data, then I do my alert, exactly the same alert, only now it's take 3, right? I'm going to save it, and I'm going to hope that we got 12 plus 1.2 like we hoped, because new number data should be now 12 from the conversion from parse int. Now if you didn't understand that, I want you to pause it and really give it a think. Look over these last couple of lines, think about what you're seeing, see if you can kind of really get the concepts. If that's not getting through, please feel free to get in touch with me and I'll see what I can do to help you further understand it. Or maybe I'll stop and I'll do a specific tutorial just for that one. But just let me know if you need that, okay? All right, so I'm going to go OK and refresh again. We get our title. I click OK. We get added data 13.2. That's the first one again. We go OK. And I'm going to move this a little bit smaller so we can see everything at the same time. Then we have 121.2, that little funny string concatenation thing that happened when we added a string to a number. Then I click OK. Oh, and then look, take 3, we get 13.2. So 13.2 comes in take 3, which is where we got the new number data, which came from the string number data, which we had put in the last take 2 one. But we used parse int. So we know that a string can be turned into a number by using parse int. Similarly, if your string happens to perhaps have decimal points in it, you can also use parse float. And in fact, it actually still works on integer numbers. Integers are just easier for the compiler to work with. So if you have a larger application, it's going to be less memory intensive. But let's just do this, and you can see that in take 3 it's still 13.2. So a parse float works just as well as a parse int. And in fact, a parse float will work more often than a parse int. So if you want to just kind of like, as a rule of thumb, go parse float, go ahead for now. Just remember that you'll want to be more accurate as time goes on. Okay, so that's 47 lines of code in this particular introduction. And I think we've kind of covered some of the more important points of the plus operator, which is kind of the biggest confusion for some people when it comes to strings versus numeric data, for example, which is being done over here. Oh, wait, no, here. And I'm actually going to go over here and say added data equals 12 plus 1.2, and that's just for clarity's sake. And I'm going to line that up over here so people can kind of later on reference the idea that that's that.